All right, everybody. We'll have a fun time. We're going to keep this a lively panel because there's really nothing more fun than talking about building DeFi protocols. To start with, we'll just go through the crew. Let everybody give a brief introduction of themselves. Let's keep it brief, guys. Themselves and what your protocol does. And then we're really going to spend a lot of this time getting into the meat of what it means to actually be a builder in the space. So Mounir, why don't you start off?
Yeah, so I'm Mounir, founder of ParaSwap.io. It's a liquidity aggregator on the Ethereum blockchain. I've been a developer before, and I'm still managing the products mostly right now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Lauko. I'm the CEO and founder of Liquity. Before that, I used to be a researcher at DFINITY, also known as the Internet Computer. I'm a lawyer by training, but I always had a keen interest in technology and did some coding project already in my youth years.
Yeah, my name is Chad Barraford. I'm one of the core developers for THORChain. I don't really matter, but what THORChain does is a cross-chain DeFi protocol where all chains and assets are agnostic. So it doesn't matter if you're operating with layer 1 Bitcoin, layer 1 Ethereum. It treats them all the same, adding DeFi to every chain in the ecosystem simultaneously.
Chad, I like that view that you don't matter.
I don't matter. It's not about. It's about the community. It's about the project. It's not about the individual.
So everybody knows who I am. My name's Hart Lambur. I'm the co-founder of a project called UMA. UMA stands for Universal Market Access. We're actually an infrastructure to allow developers to build synthetic assets and actually write generalized financial contracts in the DeFi space. So I also get to be a builder here while talking to these guys and leading a conversation. One of the things I find most interesting is comparing the process of building a DeFi protocol to a Web 2 company. And in Web 2, we have this very defined playbook. You know, you come up with an idea, you go and you raise some seed money, you and your founder launch your proof of concept, go do your Series A, hire some people, hit some metrics, do your Series B. Everyone knows what it looks like. But here, building DeFi protocols, there really, truly is no playbook. And so what I kind of wanted to go through the panel and ask you guys, give me the origin story of how you've actually built your protocols. What's different? And I'll add some of my own thoughts too. So again, we don't have to go in order, but Mounir.
Okay. So it started with an idea, as I would say any startup, and some experiments, launching with a particular vision on how I think the market would look like. And it was, in the beginning, a very naive approach of building a full retail or public dApp that anyone can use, and that was summer 2019, only 2 years ago. But it seems like ages if we in the DeFi or crypto standards, which led me to pivot into building a product for a niche at the time that was called DeFi, and it was very early stage. And then the process looks a little bit like building a traditional project where we iterate on a project and we push code and we have code reviews and build a team until DeFi became mainstream and the paradigm shift in the way we build the protocol became different. For instance, at the time, we didn't audit smart contracts because, first of all, we didn't have the means to do it, but it was very acceptable. Like Curve, for instance, when it launched, it had multi-million dollars staked in a contract without any audits. But right now, it's a no-go. So the standards of building and the timeline for building became longer and more robust. So I would say, yeah, more or less, that was my experience.
Yeah, Robert, your origin story too, or also where you've become as an immutable protocol, something that can't be changed. Like, this is, there is no Web 2 version of ideating, building something, launching it, and never being able to change it. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I set out to build an interest-free borrowing system which is more efficient than like what was around back then, like Maker, for example. So we just wanted to build something that is more capital efficient, so it can basically allow you to borrow more against your Ether that you lock up as collateral. And one of the other key areas that set us apart is that we are completely immutable, which is kind of a risky endeavor, I must admit, because what can you do if there is a bug or or if you want to change something in hindsight, which you cannot do. But I think we took a very security-first approach to building this. So we spent a lot of time on auditing and on also doing our own internal reviews, code reviews. So actually, when you look at the timeline, like we started in November 2019 and we released the product like now in April this year, so 1.5 years development time. And I would say we already had our first more or less feature complete test version or prototype ready in June last year, which means that we took almost, like we spent almost like 10, 11 months just on doing all this, just on refining all the functionality and making sure that everything works correctly, because yeah, that's what you have to do if your project or protocol is just immutable.
And Rune's story, I actually just learned just ahead of this that Rune was restarted. So I don't know, Chad, tell me.
Yeah, so the THORChain's first attempt was in 2018, and it actually didn't work out so well. And the reason why that was is because the technology wasn't there, the cryptography wasn't there. Threshold signatures didn't exist, Cosmos didn't exist quite yet. You can't build what THORChain is as a smart contract on Ethereum. It's just completely impractical. And so you actually need a sovereign chain to do it. And with Polkadot and Cosmos, that now makes it a lot easier. To roll a chain from hand by scratch is really hard. It's actually what I did when I first got into crypto is to roll my own chain from scratch just to learn how the inner workings of blockchain actually works. It's actually really hard. And so it makes it a lot easier to have something like Cosmos to be able to launch something much quicker, much easier. So the product didn't work out in 2018 because the technology wasn't there and the cryptography wasn't there yet. But in 2019, it was. And so it was kind of like a phoenix, so to speak. It kind of was kind of reborn in a sense, and it has been going for the last 2 years.
Well, but even for THORChain, many of the contributors are sort of anonymous. Like, I actually don't even know who's sort of all behind it. So how did that rebirth even happen? Like,
yeah. That's a complicated question.
you don't have to tell us all your secrets, but
no,
tell us some.
So in the original team, there's only 2 individuals who came over to the newer kind of incarnation of it, if you will. And I had met one of those 2 individuals at a hackathon in Cosmos, a Cosmos hackathon in Berlin in 2019. And him and I were just like, oh, let's partner up and hack on something. And actually, that's where the first lines of code was committed at that time. And we won. I think we won the hackathon too, and got some Cosmos Atom coins and stuff, which was fun.
I'm sure you remember if you won or not. I'm sure you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that's kind of at that time it was different, right? And so me and this individual we met each other, and we started kind of hacking on this idea, and some of the math was already worked out from the previous iteration. So we just kind of started recoding it again with a new mentality, or a new with like kind of. Started working on threshold signatures and how to implement that in a way that you can secure hundreds of millions of billions of dollars with anonymous individuals running that system across the entire planet, which has never been done before in the history of crypto. Like there's a lot of things that THORChain is doing that like nobody's ever done before, and so we are definitely trailblazing in a major ways. And so even today there's hundreds of millions of dollars on THORChain's network that are all secured by random individuals. Well, not random, but anonymous individuals across the entire planet, and I have no idea who they are, to be honest with you. And I don't want to know who they are either.
So, from the perspective of the audience, I'm going to say that you almost have like 3 different stories here around this origin, where, like, Chad, you've got this like hackathon kind of come together, emerges from the ethos, metaverse type thing, creates this project. Robert, for you, your origin story to me looks like an intellectual experiment that you like very thoughtfully considered, dreamt up, got a team around to build and then like launch into the world. And Mounir, maybe it's best to say like you had a very much like a very product focus, like you wanted to build this product that potentially looks slightly more like what like a Web 2 path might look like, maybe. Do you guys think this is the future of how DeFi protocols get built? Do you think there will be no pattern? Do you think, or separately, a question I've been kind of considering is, will there be a playbook like there is in Web 2 of how these things get done that'll emerge in the next 5 or 10 years?
I mean, I would say it's not a playbook in the beginning, but it's a playbook at the end. Because we're all trying to get to the same place in terms of decentralization and launching whatever protocol we're trying to launch. How that all originates from, it doesn't really matter. It just kind of happens in different ways and mechanisms, different people getting together, whether it's a hackathon or one of the other kind of mechanisms. I don't think it's going to matter, but we all have the same mentality of where we want to get to, right? And what we want to deliver and how we want to contribute to the world and create these public good networks that the only reason why they exist is just to serve humanity and not itself. And so that's a very noble thing I think we're all kind of going after. And so that's really more what it's about for me, not so much the origins, but the ending.
So let's talk about that, guys. Like, because this idea of decentralization, it's like both an overused word, like massively overused, and you've heard it in this audience like way too many times. But I also very much view that it is core to what drives our respective projects. Tell me more, like why does decentralization, I think it's a good opportunity for us to educate the audience of like, why does decentralization actually matter here? And yeah, some of these are kind of layup questions for you guys, but like, I actually think we don't spend enough time really focusing on like why this is actually critical to making these products function. So
I think it depends on the perspective. For instance, for a protocol like us or any of your guys' protocols, it comes down to security, because not being decentralized means having a liability on the core team that can shut down, that can have introduced maybe bugs or any kind of vulnerability. So I think being decentralized is first of all equivalent to being secure, first of all, but also being unstoppable, because being centralized is also another kind of liability. In tomorrow's whatever government or a large corporation can make an attack and stop this protocol or maybe corrupt that protocol. So I think decentralization is a necessity, is not an option when we're building a decentralized protocol. And it's also redundant. If it's not decentralized, I mean, what's the point? We already have fintech, we already have applications that work in CeFi, for instance. So we are building something that is better. So it has to be decentralized. If it's not decentralized, we're just like doing the same thing and covering it with a decentralized, buzzword.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think security is one of the main purposes of decentralization. Like through fault tolerance, like through decentralizing your system, you can ensure that it remains tolerant even if there is like one or two or a number of parties that fail, because you still have enough others that do their job. Yeah, we take this approach to its extreme, I would say, by even decentralizing the front ends. So that's something that not many projects do, because they focus on just decentralizing their protocol. So yeah, that was an experiment for us, because we didn't want to rely on just one single party like ourselves running a front end. And what we set out to do is creating an incentive mechanism to basically reward front ends for the turnover they generate for the protocol. And it was an experiment because, yeah, it was hard to anticipate whether this would work out, but it did work out quite well, I would say. Now we have like around 50 front ends that are up and running, even though only like a handful of them make handsome profits. The rest is just like the long tail. But what's interesting is that by doing so, we were also able to leverage kind of like this second level marketing effect, because the front ends, they have like now an interest to go out and seek more stability depositors, because they are the ones that then generate the revenue both for the front end and for the end user. So the incentives are aligned. The front ends are an incentive to gather more and more users. And yeah, so that's another advantage, basically, the marketing effect, the promotion that we get from the front end.
I actually want to go deeper on that, because I think, Robert, this is one of the coolest things Liquity has done. Just to really almost repeat what Robert's saying, there is no front end that his project, his team operates. Instead, they've incentivized other people to run front ends for the protocol. And I actually think it's sort of the extreme version of decentralization, where there isn't an operator. And even more interestingly, I think this fits into why decentralization is so important, because you don't have a central team that's trying to retain control or extract rent or extract profits. You actually have enabled this like secondary marketing level, because the users of the protocol become owners of the protocol. And I mean, listen, we're all biased on this panel, but that ability, I also think you can't do that with a centralized business. You can't, like, not only do you not have the incentive, I don't even know if you have the mechanism to make your users be your owners. Like, it's unreal. Chad, I feel like I interrupted you, though.
Well, I was going to, I mean, you were saying about the UIs right there, and like, at least in my opinion, UI should not be web UIs because of centralization. And you can talk about unstoppable domains and all these things, but in the end, you know, you guys are, you know, paying people or assisting people to create different UIs. What makes more sense to me is making downloadable apps. That once I download this app, I always have availability to this network. I don't rely on any domains or any other service or anything to exist between me and the protocol. So I download a version of like THORSwap, for example, which is one of the apps that are available, or one of the many apps that are available actually. But that's one of them. And once I download, I have it forever. And it doesn't matter what happens. The government can shut down whatever server they want on the entire planet. It does not matter. I always have access to THORSwap, and I can, you know, swap my Bitcoin for Ethereum or Tether or any asset that I might choose at any point in time that I choose to do. But in terms of decentralization, we talk a lot about the technology and about the security, and those are all like very important and very valid things. But I think we don't talk about enough is actually the human rights element to it. This is actually the most important thing, I would argue. At least what I get very excited about in this space is that when Bitcoin was created, it created a new form of freedom, liberty, and self-sovereignty that the world has never seen before across the entire planet for every human on this planet, no matter what side of an imaginary line that you happen to be born on. That was a remarkable innovation, and it created a way of income equality that we've never seen before in history, right? So in order to achieve that in more useful ways, our protocols have to lean towards decentralization as much as we can reasonably push it. Because as we do that, we actually grant more human rights for more people across the entire planet, and we can restructure this place in a way that actually gives freedom, liberty, and self-sovereignty to everybody across this entire planet. If that's not get you excited about what this industry is doing, I don't know what the fuck would, because that's an amazing thing to get behind.
You know, I'm the moderator, but I'm gonna take a side note to build on what you're saying in maybe a more City of London type way. So my view on DeFi, my view on finance, on traditional finance, is a history of legal contracts. I think of every financial product and innovation is really a legal contract. Insurance is a very pure example. Derivatives are a very pure example. But you can keep going, and everything in finance in traditional finance is secured by legal recourse. What does that mean? It means that you only have access to financial products and services within your legal domain. Mm-hmm. And so if you're American, you get access to, you have to be an American entity to have access to American financial products and services, Canadian, Venezuelan, what else?
Sure.
And this siloed world, right, creates inequality in the access to financial products and services you have. Yep. And it also, you know, means that we don't have this global system. What does DeFi do? I look at DeFi fundamentally as a novel contracting system, a new way to write contracts that are not enforced by legal recourse, but are enforced by blockchains plus economic incentives. And the major advantage of this new contracting system is that it's global by nature and hence equitable, right? Or more equitable. Also really fucking cool and really exciting, right? Like all those other things.
That as well.
That as well. But okay, so that was my tangent as moderator, is why I think DeFi is so cool and why I think traditional finance people should look at this as a novel contracting mechanism that lets finance be global by default. But with that, now actually let you guys all speak, the global nature of this, what are you guys seeing? And actually, do you even know where the users of your protocol are? You know, if this was a fintech event, we'd be talking about like serving the European market or serving the American market, but we're not fintech, we're like DeFi. So where are your users? Tell me more.
There is no deterministic way to say, because we don't ask them who they are, but we can like safely say that the vast majority are DeFi or crypto natives who are using this, because we can see the volumes that are going on ParaSwap, on other protocols as well. But also, we noticed a shift once we started launching on new chains. For instance, once we launched on Binance Smart Chain and Polygon, and recently in Avalanche, we saw a lot of retail coming in, and that's those are insights we can see. For instance, the questions. Before we used to get very technical questions. Now we get very broad questions or very new questions. So we can see a lot of retail who came in, and that's driven by some like economics, like gas fees and all of those things. So I think now the adoption of DeFi is very broad, and we see all over the world using DeFi, even in countries where DeFi is or crypto is forbidden. These people became sophisticated enough to bypass all those barriers. So we can say that, yeah, the adoption is growing exponentially right now, at least what we can see in our perspective.
Yeah, Robert, where are your users? Like, and I mean, I know you don't know in the same way Mounir does, but give us the qualitative kind of ideas of who's using the protocol.
Yeah, so quantitatively, I mean, we have the stats, we see like the size of the user's positions, and we know our TVL, so we can basically see like how they group and like how big they are. And I mean, just looking at the numbers, it's clear that many whales are using Liquity. Like we have many positions that are above like 2 million in size. Like that's kind of now, I think the average, like 2 million worth of Ether being locked up as collateral. That's kind of the average. I mean, it's really hard to say who those users are. I mean, many users aped in within the first even 10 days of existence. So they were, I mean, that was really interesting because we didn't really do any like concerted promotion, or we were quite low key. And then we just came out and released the system, and within a few days, I mean, we had already like 800 users or so. And yeah, many of them were like apes, degens who aped in, and got a nice chunk of the early adopter incentive, and they are now kind of locked in because, I mean, locked in, they just now have an interest-free loan and no clear like pressure to pay back because, yeah, they can just keep it open for as long as they want. But yeah, it's really hard to say who those users are. I mean, yeah, we haven't really seen institutional adoption yet, but that's something we're now working on because that would also like open up the whole user base.
Yeah. Chad, anything to add?
Well, I mean, partially I don't really care what users are in a sense. But we do see kind of a why. We do see that there are some people that are just, you know, early adopters of THORChain, just providing liquidity, something like this. But even when the chain was launched back in April, like Shapeshift actually publicly had just ripped out their backend and then dropped THORChain in the middle of it. So I was like, now after I was talking to Eric Voorhees, and I was like, are you sure you want to do it on day one? Because do you not want to wait a few weeks or something like that before you put your entire backend on a protocol that just launched yesterday? He was like, no, I'm doing it. All right, man. But yes, we are actually seeing exchanges themselves integrating. We're actually in conversation with the centralized exchange right now. They want to rip out their backend and put in THORChain because they have instant access to like all this liquidity, and they don't have to maintain a huge, you know, treasure trove of a cold wallet to maintain, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. They have instant access to any asset they need the moment they need it, and so like that is very attractive to, you know, a lot of exchanges. But even like wallet manufacturers are integrating with THORChain as well because you can actually make a profit facilitating swaps on THORChain, right? So if you have a wallet that you're producing and you want to make some money to fund the production of your wallet, you can actually use affiliate fees on the swaps to actually generate revenue for your project. You can actually fund, you know, your entire, like most wallets struggle to figure out like how are we going to find money to pay the engineers and do these things. That's the easy answer. It's called THORChain. You can just make swaps, and every swap you get a little bit off the top. And how much you get off the top is like your choice. Or you just tell your users it's going to be, you know, 30 basis points or 10 basis points, whatever you want to do. They can choose whatever they want, doesn't matter. And they can actually fund their entire project just by using THORChain, and meanwhile providing a really needed, you know, feature of like, I need to exchange from layer 1 Bitcoin to, you know, Dogecoin or whatever, it doesn't matter. That's a really kind of important concept.
It's actually a compelling sales pitch. So, but like, the other thing that we prepped or talked about chatting about is this multi-chain world we're heading in. Because we're talking about DeFi here. Chad, like multi-chain is actually core to THORChain, very much so. I actually kind of think we have a nice range of perspectives here because Robert, you're very much Ethereum-centric by just straight up design. And Mounir, you're kind of like in between, started Ethereum, going multi-chain, have seen advantages of that. Love to get your views on what this multi-chain world might look like for your project. Just even your general views on this ecosystem, with maybe a particular view towards composability. So one of the things that has really made DeFi and Ethereum kick ass is this composability concept, and this is a hard problem. So it'd just be great to hear your thoughts. So yeah, Robert, why don't we start with your takes on?
Yeah, so maybe let me start with the general composability as a problem, because I see this as one of the biggest challenges, I would say, for DeFi, because I mean, we've seen that just running on one chain may not be performant enough. So we need systems, DeFi protocols running on multiple chains just to be scalable. But then you end up with the problem that you need to make sure that you can still make atomic transactions that either go through on all the protocols, living on different chains, or they all fail, because you want to make a transaction that is a combination of those, and you don't want to just having half of your transaction being processed. So I think that's kind of a technical challenge, because there are commitment schemes and stuff like that, where you can, or yanking of Vitalik's proposal, where you just basically put all the tokens on one chain and then you do your operations, or put all the contracts on one chain, do your operations, put the contract backs on the shards, or where they were before. But I mean, that's kind of seems like a workaround, and I'm not sure if we are there yet, where we have a solution for atomic transactions across multiple chains, really. I mean, but that's one thing, and then also for us, Liquity, I mean, there is another challenge, which is, I mean, we have our own stablecoin, the LUSD, and it would be strange to basically create multiple versions of the same token on different chains without having them coupled to each other in a fungible way. So, and that's not kind of obvious how you would do that, because then you need bridges. I mean, if you want to allow people to borrow on different chains, but at the same time you want to make sure that it's still the different token, it's not enough to bridge the token. I mean, that's easy. Yeah, so those are challenges we have to see how to get along with them in the future, but we don't really have now short-term plans to go out and deploy multiple LUSDs on multiple chains.
So, Chad, for THORChain, right, it's obviously a multi-chain world where you're swapping between all these chains, but where does smart contracting lie? I'm actually very curious to get your worldview on okay, cool, we move between all these chains, but what's the platform where people do the DeFi money Legos thing?
Well, so this is a little bit of a contrarian perspective.
That's what we want.
But smart contracts actually don't make sense.
Ah.
Okay? I know as people let me explain. So you were talking about Web 2.0 world, right, earlier, right? The equivalent of smart contracts in the Web 2.0 world is this thing called Heroku, right? Where I don't have to think about my infrastructure. I don't have to think about the security of my system. I can just build an app in a weekend, upload it to Heroku, and it just runs my app for me and all that kind of stuff. Now, no self-respecting engineer actually uses Heroku outside the context of a hobby or a little fun little side, or a chatbot or something kind of somewhat silly. Because if you're going to build a real platform, you want to have complete control over your entire environment. So I don't want to build an app and then have somebody else's app be doing really well, which causes my app to be not really usable because the gas prices are this, blah, 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 all these things. It actually limits you, even from an engineering perspective, it limits what you're capable of doing, right? So in order for DeFi to actually be successful, I would argue that you cannot do it with smart contracts. We use smart contracts now because it was our only option for the last 3 years, right? Until Cosmos and Polkadot make that possible to have another option now, which is actually really much more powerful, much more flexible, more technically complex, just as running my own AWS infrastructure from my own Web 2.0 app is more technically complex. But it makes sense to have more control over your environment when designing and building your protocol, right? And furthermore, if you are building your DeFi protocol on a specific ecosystem, whether it be Solana or Ethereum or whatever, you are pigeonholing yourself into a small subset of the liquidity of crypto, right? Ethereum right now, with all its ERC20s, is 25% of the entire liquidity of crypto, right? don't you want access to the full like $2 trillion? You're not going to convince people to use your DeFi protocol when there's some other protocol that does exactly the same thing but has access to every chain and every asset in the system. It does identically the same service.
So this is why you go to panels, right? So you guys get this contrarian view, right? I love this. So Chad here is a multi-chain maximalist, where instead of having a smart contract, you build your own chain.
You have to. I think it makes sense 2 years ago to build everything on Ethereum, but it doesn't make sense anymore.
I'm the moderator, and I'm supposed to like not be neutral, but I like vehemently disagree. But I love that perspective. I think it could be true.
If I've convinced you, I've convinced all of them.
I think that's a super interesting view, to think that smart contracts are a distraction before you build your own chain. But it does seem like you would lack a lot of composability features, or at least easy composability.
So composability is more complicated, but it's totally a solvable issue, and THORChain is definitely going to be doing that. Actually, there's already conversations working with other, like even Ethereum smart contracts, of integrating the two. Like Sushi has talked about integrating, Bitcoin swaps on Sushi, using THORChain as the mechanism to get in and out of that system, right? Yeah, I just don't think that smart contracts make sense and Ethereum makes sense for experimentation, for like quick launches. Let's throw this idea together. Let's try this economic model, or that economic model. Let's try this different AMM way of thinking of things, and experiment with different ideas, and then see what actually gets capital, gets volume trading, and all these kind of things to figure out what actually makes the most sense. And then once you actually establish that this protocol, whatever the protocol that might be, let's build that in a way that it treats every asset and every chain identically the same, and everybody, including Bitcoin, is a first-class citizen. Instead of treating Bitcoin as a second-class citizen, where you have to do these wrapped or pegged assets, which is not Bitcoin, obviously, and exposes you to significantly more risk in your profile just because you want to use some DeFi platform that's not required from a first principles perspective to be on Ethereum. It can be on anything. So you can actually provide like real DeFi for like Bitcoin, for example, without needing to go through these bridges that give you increased risk. You can't even secure wrapped assets. I can go on a rant with that, which I won't.
Save that one. But
there's a whole thing about that.
I love the perspective. I don't know, Robert, Mounir, like any reactions to this thing I find very interesting.
I think it depends on how you see smart contract, but there is no size fits all. Maybe in some cases it will make sense, and we've seen some experiment like Compound, who tried to build a new blockchain on Polkadot, if I remember well, which may or may not sense. But definitely the composability side is always an issue. I mean, whether you're building on a cross-chain environment, on a smart contract environment, I would say DeFi exists because composability exists, and we exist because there is composability, because ParaSwap will not make sense if there is not many DEXs and there is no fragmentation. So I see smart contract as building on a JVM, like EVM and JVM, and building your own blockchain is like you're doing C++ or C. Maybe you can see it this way, but I disagree. It's like Heroku because it's more complex than that. Our approach in cross-chain, I think, is a necessity as well. And breaking composability, we don't see another way to do. I mean, we don't see another alternative right now. But we think we can achieve atomicity, but it's going to be an asynchronous atomicity, not synchronous as we can see in a single blockchain. Right now, so far, what we've seen is people using game theory mechanics in order to achieve this cross-chain and have this security on cross-chain, but nobody has got it right as we can see in a single blockchain. So I think this will develop in the next coming years because multi-chain is a reality. It's happening, and we see a multi-billion-dollar markets are being already formed. So yeah, I think maybe one of the projects will do it. Maybe you will be right in a few years. So we don't know how this is going to play. We haven't even imagined that cross multi-chains like this side chains will be successful a year from now. It's just happened this year, so we don't know. Maybe you're going to be right in a few years. We'll see.
I hope I am.
We don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah.
We don't know until we know.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
And I think apart from like having this fragmentation with regard to user experience, I mean, that's already like a challenge. If every smart contract lives on its own chain, I mean, people need to have their wallets, they need to have their own equipment and whatnot, like private keys for those specific chains, which makes it much more difficult to interact. But I think that's only one thing. But then on the other hand, I mean, how would you secure like that many blockchains? I mean, the more you fragment, the less capital, the less whatever, like computational power, if you use like proof of work, you would have on those chains. So I mean, doesn't it make sense to concentrate rather, like to have like a few platforms or like infrastructure blockchains that are optimized for general purpose applications, and they are optimized for security and speed and scalability, but like they would basically serve as the host for a large number of different applications? Or why do you see that it makes really sense to basically have separate chains for all applications?
Because if you put something as a smart contract within a specific ecosystem, you're actually betting on a horse, right? That this ecosystem, whatever it is, right? It can be us, it can be Ethereum, it can be whatever you want to be, but you're betting on a horse. Now, THORChain is not betting on a horse; it's betting on the race, right? Because it doesn't matter which is this ultrasound money or which is the this or that. It doesn't matter. It's still going to service the entire industry, right? That's a much better bet. I will always bet on the race over the individual horse anytime, because that's a smarter bet, right? I don't see why that wouldn't head in that direction. Now, there's different things like, for example, if you want to put the stock exchange onto a blockchain, you probably would not do that as a multi-chain way, because that doesn't make sense. You maybe use Solana because it has high throughput, for example. So not everything would be a multi-chain. In THORChain's case, it is, because it's trying to create highways between these isolated islands that we now have called these blockchains. And it's doing it in a way of using an AMM in the beginning, right? So you can swap from one asset to the other in a trustless way. But once you have those highways built, you can do all sorts of things. You can do lending, you can do synthetics, composites, all sorts of like new DeFi protocols that can interact and interface with all these assets. In the end, you don't have to become like a THORChain fan. You have to be a fan of Bitcoin, and then you would still want to use THORChain because it gives you, a Bitcoin layer 1 Bitcoin yield on your layer 1 Bitcoin, right? So we're not trying to convince everybody to come to us and like our ecosystem's the best and it's better than everybody else for the X, Y, and Z. We're merely saying, no, stay in whatever ecosystem you're in, whether you're a Bitcoin fan, Ethereum fan, or Solana fan, or whatever, Terra, or whatever. You can just use us to help produce more yield, or get in it as an entry and exit to whatever ecosystems you want to participate in. That's a much more a stronger bet, in my opinion, than trying to convince the world that my ecosystem is better than everybody else's.
It's so interesting. I find this so interesting again. But like as a contract, if you take my perspective of like contracting system, and let's go into TradFi, you do sometimes bet the horse on like, okay, I'm going to write my contract under US law, under Delaware law, or under UK law. There's like a handful of jurisdictions that people have picked as being the thing they actually want to be their enforcement mechanism.
Yeah.
And in some ways, what you're abstractly suggesting is like, well, then you have to follow the rule. Like if you're really going to build this thing right, like build your own court system. Right, is sort of what you're suggesting, which I think is very fascinating in some use cases. Anyways, I got another question for you guys, but I love this perspective, and I think it's really a really interesting world to be like, well, maybe smart contracts have been this distraction, and you're supposed to just build it in your own blockchain. That's something I learned. So, okay. Other question, DeFi. It's grown like hugely over the last 18 months. A lot of people have a thesis or view that it's going to like eke into traditional finance. I think a lot of people in this room would be really interested in that. What do you guys think is necessary for DeFi to get like mainstream TradFi adoption? And maybe the headline, like the kicker here is like, think of grandma. Like, what will it take for grandma's money to be parked on DeFi rails, say being lent in a lending protocol or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it already starts with just keeping your private key secure. I mean, that's already a challenge in and by itself if you want to be really on the safe side. So I think like having good self-custody solutions that just don't rely on some quirky device or keeping like hundreds of 20 words in memory, that would already be like a good start, or at least something where you can be sure that it's your funds and it won't get like misused. And then also like it's so complicated. I mean, with the current systems, like just installing MetaMask that's confusing because you need different apps to run, like in your browser. You need like different protocol, like you need different apps to communicate with different protocols to make use of your funds, or like to basically do the actions that you want. And that's really like at the moment like it's way too complex. So I think there something much more streamlined that is kind of guiding you through the process step by step, where you see I start here and I end here, and this is the process, without like having you to Google like what do I have to do to set up a wallet, what do I have to do to connect to this application, and then where do you find an exchange. I think you need to have like a clear path and a clear step-by-step way to get what you want to do.
Do you think it's possible for traditional finance intermediaries to use DeFi as the rails behind the scenes? Like in the same way Chad was talking about ripping out the back end and replacing it with THORChain. Do you think Lloyd's Bank here will ever rip out their back end and replace, like grandma doesn't even know her money is in Liquity?
Yeah, I do think that like kind of a CDFI integration could help a lot. So, I mean, it is like basically a compromise, because maybe some users, they rather prefer having like a banking relationship, but they want to still benefit from like some of the economic benefits of the DeFi protocol that's running like on the back end. But I think like such an integration could be really useful for opening up the whole ecosystem to a new group of users that are not really crypto native, that know how to use a mobile phone and know how to like have some basic understanding of money, but they have no technical understanding. I think that could be a good start. And yeah, that's also something that we are looking into, like basically, like we have this decentralized front-end approach, and one obvious way to extend it is to have basically like financial institutions run a front-end and maybe also help their users to use a front-end, or even act as an intermediary, maybe taking a charge, a cut on the benefits, but then still offering a good user experience.
Yeah, I think so. CeFi makes sense in the short term, in the interim, to help kind of mitigate people onto the DeFi space. Maybe that'll work out over the next like 5-10 years. But like, you know, my grandmother won't be on the DeFi space for another 10-20 years. To be honest with you, you know, even the internet, my grandmother wasn't on the internet for 10 plus years, whatever. And that was a lot easier than we're talking about changing money. And money moves very slowly, right? Like the banking system is largely the same as it was 400 years ago, fundamentally, right? And so it takes a very long time to push on money, right? But in the end, some CeFi, whether it be Celsius or BlockFi, right, they're going to offer you, 5% interest, and on your first Bitcoin, or the second one, you're going to get like 0.2 or something like this, right? Like, and then you're going to tell those people like, hey, you can get 5% here, or you can get like 25% over here on the DeFi space. Removing the central entity out of it, your yield is significantly higher, because you don't have an infrastructure to pay employees and like all this kind of stuff that you have with a centralized entity of some kind. So, but I'm not even concerned about grandma, because we are so far away from grandma. We don't even have the infrastructure yet. Like the Lightning Network needs to kind of need more time to mature and grow, right? It's a great protocol, and I love what they're doing, but they're not going to build that in a weekend, right? It's going to take years to kind of grow that out. And same thing with THORChain. It's going to take years to grow that out. And so like the infrastructure is way too early to be even talking about grandma. People always want to get grandma on the system, because that means coin goes up, and I now have many Lambos or whatever, right? But for right now, what we really need to be focused on as a community is getting the infrastructure right, and getting the design concepts right.
Chad, what you're also suggesting is an alternative thesis, which is that we don't get TradFi on DeFi. Like, don't even go there. Just build your own crypto ecosystem from scratch. Have the metaverse in there, have kids with JPEGs and NFTs, like do all that shit, and don't even worry at all about trying to bridge back to TradFi, which I think is actually a contrarian thesis if you play that out. I think most people at this conference would be like, no, DeFi is going to suck in some TradFi stuff. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Maybe that's actually a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
And Mounir.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Continue.
I've been talking too much already.
Oh, it's okay. Now I was saying that there are already some innovations that try to create a middle ground where grandma can use DeFi and it's not custodial, it's not CeFi. One example is Argent, who is like trying to do this retail play, and it's very simple to use and non-custodial. That's one of the examples, and I think the future versions of Argent will look exactly like a Revolut and abstracting all the complexity of DeFi without necessarily compromising on security and decentralization. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Well, security and decentralization. Okay, so, I mean, do you guys, like, if the current infrastructure right now, there's no undo button if anything goes wrong, which to me seems like a prerequisite for grandma's money here. I'll ask you guys another weirder question. Like, traditional finance is premised around this concept of recourse. If something goes wrong, there is an ability to undo it by like suing somebody. And that's powered by the fact that you know who they are. You have identity, so you can go and be like, yo, I'm suing you, give me my money back. DeFi doesn't have that. And most DeFi today doesn't even have anything close to a concept of recourse. We're effectively embracing a system where there is no undo button at all.
Well, there is insurance, which is
it's
Exactly.
like Nexus Mutual is kind of doing like it's not going to undo a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain per se, but if you get pwned in one way or another because of some exploit, you get kind of at least like a coverage. I think that's viable. But like in order to have a world money, you need to have finality to it. If you don't have finality to it, then it becomes like this very loose thing that is not very viable as a currency.
Well, but hold on. You don't have finality in traditional finance, and you have world money.
Yeah, and it doesn't work well. Right? It's like the U.S. dollar, is like the best currency in the world, quote unquote, right? But yet it sucks. Right, and so like we can just print it all day, and we do it as Americans. We just print like in immense amounts, like all day, every day, and we do like, I've actually had the IRS come into my personal bank account and clean me the hell out, right? Just because they felt like it, right? Which is fine, right?
But because you're on stage talking about all the libertarian stuff, man.
Honestly, I'm not even libertarian. I'm actually a Democrat myself. But the system as it's designed is designed to empower the few and not empower the mass, right? That's fundamentally different. And by empowering the few, you give them the power to be able to manipulate the system as they see fit for their own well-being and benefit. You give a monetary policy where it actually is democratized and is owned by the people underneath it, grassroots up rather than top down. You need that instant finality to be viable.
So
not instant finality, but you need finality.
Well, you got 20 seconds left, but we'll conclude. That view means, though, you have a financial system with no recourse, which is very interesting to conceptualize, right?
Yeah, it's true.
So, guys, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for this.